Hi, this video gives you a quick overview of Dungeon Architect. So Dungeon Architect is a tool for Unity that helps you create vast procedural levels, and this is one of the levels. And in this video, we'll have a look at how to create your own dungeons, and we'll see how to use the dungeon game object for that purpose, and we'll also briefly look at the theme file. So to start with, let's destroy the dungeon and also remove the prefab. And now we're starting with an empty scene, and we don't have anything except for a camera and a directional light. So to start with, once you've imported Dungeon Architect into your game, you would see a Dungeon Architect folder, navigate to prefabs, and drag and drop the dungeon grid game object. So this is the dungeon prefab that is responsible for building your dungeons. And if you look at the properties, you see that it has quite a lot of configurations. And if I try to build it now, it notifies me that I need to assign at least one theme file. So I need to design a theme file before I can start building my dungeon. And a theme file is just a mapping that tells Dungeon Architect which meshes you'd like to place in different parts of your dungeons. For example, what meshes you like to place for the grounds, for the walls, and so on. So Dungeon Architect comes with a few sample contents to quickly get you started. I have created a few modular meshes, and this comes for free with Dungeon Architect, so you can quickly test this out. So I have a sample theme here, which I'm going to assign and use just for demo purpose. So drag this and assign it as a theme, and if I click build, it has now built my dungeon. Now you see everything is cluttered, my whole hierarchy is cluttered. So let me destroy this, create a new game object, call it dungeon items or something. Reset its transformation. Now I would like everything Dungeon Architect to create to be placed inside of this so it doesn't clutter my scene view. So I'm going to drag this into the item parent of the pool dungeon scene provider, and now if I build, it places everything inside of this. So here we have a nice little dungeon, and we'll see how we can create. So before that, to give you a better understanding, I'll quickly walk you through the generation process of what happens internally behind the scenes. So this is the documentation for Dungeon Architect. It's quite vast. You can go through it. So here's a general overview of how it is done internally. When you click build, Dungeon Architect builds the dungeon in two phases. The first phase is the layout generation phase, where you don't actually spawn the meshes, but it just builds the layout in memory. And in the second stage, it takes that layout and it spawns the meshes for you, meshes and other game objects. So in the layout generation phase, it builds the layout. It does all of these stuff and then builds the layout for you, and then it populates the entire level with something called markers. A marker is just a 3D point. It's an invisible point in space which has a name. So for example, I have a wall marker, and a wall marker is placed over here with the name wall and a position and an orientation. And likewise, we have other markers like ground and door and so on. So what Dungeon Architect has done is it has taken the layout, and then it has scattered the whole level with markers, populating wall markers along these edges, and populating ground markers in the internal areas, and populating the fence markers along the corridors. And then once that is done, comes the next phase, the visual generation phase. And you see the only thing overlapping between these two phases is the collection of markers. So in the next phase, the theming engine takes all of those marker points that were generated in the previous phase, and it looks for that corresponding marker in the theme file. So in my theme file here, I have defined that I would like to place this mesh on the wall marker. So wherever a wall is encountered, it would take this mesh and place it there. Same way for ground, same way for fence and doors and so on. So this is how you specify in Dungeon Architect what meshes you'd like to place at different locations of your dungeon. So I have specified, for example, I'd like to place these two meshes in my walls. That's why I've attached it to the wall marker, and that's why it has placed these. It knows what to place at different areas. So just to show you, I'm going to I'm going to break this link, and you see immediately you saw that it no longer created the wall mesh. So you also have a nice interactive way of we change the probability to 1. Interactive way of designing your theme. So let's go ahead and design our own theme from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and destroy this. And then go to assets, just create a new theme. I'm going to call it my theme. And if I want to add a mesh to the ground, I would just drag and drop a prefab or a game object, prefab or a mesh or anything. It could be a particle or a light or anything from my project view onto the theme editor. So Dungeon Architect comes with a few free assets. So these are the ones I have created, so you can quickly get started. I have so let's select the ground mesh and place it here now. If I go ahead and click make a link, nothing really happens on the scene. Why? Because the theme that we are editing is not being used by the dungeon actor. So let's break this, and I'm going to select this dungeon and assign my theme that I'm editing right now. And now that this theme that we are editing is being used by the dungeon actor in the scene, any modification you do here would automatically update the dungeon in the scene. So you get a nice immediate visual feedback on while you're designing your theme. So when I assign a ground, anywhere a ground is expected, it has inserted this ground mesh. So let's add some walls as well. If I go to meshes, I have a so wherever a wall was expected, it has inserted a wall. We also have fence. So Dungeon Architect has rooms and it has corridors. So rooms are connected together using corridors. Rooms are surrounded by walls, which you see here, and corridors are surrounded by fence. With anything you attach here will be populated here. So I have this. I would like to use this as a fence. And this empty space that you see here can be filled up using a wall half marker. So I'm going to go ahead and assign this as well here. And I need to bring this down because it's too high, so now it's covering this up. Okay, now my fence is a little too high. I would like this to be a little smaller. So I'm going to scale this down by 0.5. So if you see something that your designer hasn't created as you'd expect, for example, if the scale is not right, you can easily go ahead and update the offset here. Now I have doors as well. Let me select the door. And there is a stair. Now watch what happens when I add a stair. Let's go to a place where we have where we expect a staircase over here. Right, so in this case, you see that the stair is not aligned correctly because the pivot is not aligned properly. The designer, when they exported this mesh, the pivot is not as you would expect, but that's not at all an issue in Dungeon Architect. You can easily apply an offset to fix the pivot. So I'm going to rotate this by 180 degrees, and I'm going to bring this back by 2. Now there's another important configuration in the Dungeon Actor. It is called the grid cell size. So this grid cell size is the size of your modular assets. So when I designed these assets, I made them to be 4 by 4. So that's why it fits so properly. right? But the height of the staircase, I designed it to be two units high, right? But right now, Dungeon Architect is configured to be only 1 unit high, so 4 by 1 by 4. So that's why the height is not aligning properly. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this to 2 and rebuild. And it has rebuilt my dungeon, and the heights are proper. So this is an important field that you should ask your designer what the dimensions of the model assets are, or you can just find it out yourself. And you have to update this based on the assets that you're using. There is also a stair 2x for stairs that are twice as high, but I don't have that asset, so I'm going to just change the max allowed stair height to 1. So when it's designing the dungeon, it will not create such a high height variation. It will create a variation only with one step height. So that's why you don't see. If I would have specified a mesh that is twice as high, I would have seen the I would have seen a mesh here, but I'm just going to set this to 1 and rebuild. So it has readjusted the layout so that it smoothly transitions. Instead of having 2 step heights, it just transitions so that we have just 1 max height variation. Right, now everything you've seen now is a 1-to-1 mapping, right? So we have specified that we like to have this mesh for the ground, this mesh for the walls, and so on. But this is not restricted to just a 1-to-1 mapping. You can have a 1-to-many mapping. So I have another I have another wall with a window on it, and sometimes I'd like to use this wall in its place. So if I go ahead and assign this here, you see that now everything is using my is using this windowed wall. The reason is, whenever you have multiple meshes assigned to a marker, Dungeon Architect starts executing them one by one from left to right. And when it comes to this node, it decides whether this node has to be inserted into the scene or not. And the way it does it is by using the probability variable. If it is set to 1, then it inserts it 100% of the time. If it is set to 0, for example, it doesn't insert it, and it moves to the next one. But if, say, I set it to 0.5, then 50% of the time it will insert it, and if it doesn't insert it, it moves to the next one. Now there's another important field called consume on attach. Let me change this to 1. Now, when this node is executed, and if the probability, based on the probability, if this mesh was inserted into the scene, then it would look at this flag. If this flag is set, then the execution would stop and it would no longer go further. If, however, it was not inserted into the scene because of the probability, then it would just ignore this and move to the next node. So now we would want this this window to be inserted, say, only 25% of the time. So I'm going to change this to 0.25. And it's important that I keep this consume on attach checked, because if I don't, then even if it inserts this mesh, it would move and insert the next one as well in that same position, and I don't want that, right? So let me just show you. If I check consume on attach, you see what happened. It has inserted both the meshes, this as well as this, and that is not what we want. So so I need to have this checked so that only one of this is ever executed. And there are also wall separators. So if you want to add a mesh in between the walls, so I have and right now their thickness is the same. So there you see some Z fighting. Let me increase the scale to 0.25. Right, here's another example where I have this stair, and I would like to have some more meshes attached to the same marker. I have this railing mesh. So I do not see this mesh even though I have made the link. Why? Because consume and attach is fixed, but I want this node to be executed even when this node is executed. So I'm just going to uncheck this, and now you see that after this execution, this has also executed and inserted it because the probability is 1. The pivot is wrong, so I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this by 180, bring this back by -2, and move it over there by -2, 2. Move by 0.15, 1.75. Okay, and it's too thin, so let me scale this to 2, so it's a little thick here. And let's add another one on the other side. And again, I don't see it here. Why? Because this has now consumed it. So I don't want it to consume it. So after this executes, again, this continues and executes it here. So same thing, just rotate by 180, -2, 1, -1.75. Okay, so it's looking good. There are many other advanced features that you can use on this theme graph, and we'll cover them in the later videos. So just to show you, I'm going to revert back to the original theme that I had. So let me remove this and destroy my dungeon and go to the samples demo theme, and I'm going to assign this theme that I have. So this is the same theme, but it has some more extra stuff on it. We'll be covering all of these in the later videos. But just to give you a quick overview of what's to come, we have this dungeon with a lot of some decorative stuff in the bottom, and here's an interesting concept of marker emitters, where you emit markers based on some selective conditions. So here I have a curtain attached, but it's attached only if a window wall mesh is inserted. So this was done when I just created a new marker named window, and I emit that marker only when I have a window mesh assigned here, and I have some other decorative stuff. So in the next video, we'll have a look at marker emitters.